Hi, my name is Christopher Malcolm, and welcome to Movable Canvas, where we talk about cinema, art, culture, and where those three things sometimes intersect. We're going to do something a little different today. Instead of a deep dive into one film, we're going to celebrate a career. This is my tribute to one of my favorite actresses of all time, Joan Blondell. Some of you watching may have never even heard of Joan Blondell. Those of you who have had the pleasure of actually seeing her on screen, I'm pretty sure you've never forgotten her. The wisecracking brassy blonde was an absolute star in the pre-code era in the early 1930s, and her nearly 50-year career saw her working with some of the greatest filmmakers and in some of the most prestigious projects in film history. Yet nearly 100 years after her heyday, Joan is no longer a household name. I was on Turn Classic Movies once, and the interviewer was asking me if I could have dinner with any three people throughout Hollywood history, who would I choose to have, at my table? Naturally, I chose my three favorite actresses. I'm a guy, after all, right? So I choose Audrey Hepburn because she's my wife, Joan Blondell, my sweetheart, for reasons we'll discuss in this essay, and Barbara Stanwyck, Joan's tough-as-nails counterpart, who often played kind of Batman to Joan's Robin in a few films. Those are my three favorite actresses, really in that order, even though all had very different careers. Audrey, in many ways, is the most iconic. Even three-quarters of a century later, young women, many of whom have never even seen Breakfast at Tiffany's, will still have an instinctual reaction to seeing a silhouette of Holly Golightly with that designer cigarette holder. With roles in Breakfast at Tiffany's, Roman Holiday, and Sabrina, I feel like Audrey perhaps reached and still maintains the highest levels of kind of iconic stardom. Barbara Stanwyck, by comparison, also achieved lasting fame. In some ways, she actually even had a more robust career than Audrey, especially when you consider the longevity. Films like Double Indemnity have lasted the test of time, and she was legitimately headlining films in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, followed by a notable late career on television. So from a sheer number of hits perspective, it's arguable that Stanwyck actually had a better career than Audrey, even if Audrey herself seems to remain more in the cultural conversation. Then there's Joan Blondell. I mentioned that she played Robin to Stanwyck's Batman on many occasions. The pair made a great set of best friends on screen. Perhaps this is because off-screen, apparently, they were also longtime friends. But when I think about Joan's career specifically, I think it's every bit as amazing and lasting as it is unfortunate all at the same time. With her big blue eyes and kind of curvaceous figure, Joan Blondell was almost like a comic book Betty Boop come to life with blonde curls. I know we shouldn't reduce actresses to simply to their physical attributes, but Joan was fine. And this definitely wasn't lost on pre-code audiences. In the years prior to the production code taking over and making anything beyond showing a shapely ankle into a taboo, the movies had absolutely no problem displaying Joan's superior form in various stages of undress. For an actress of her time, showing off your figure was just kind of part of the job. And while studios never went quite so far as to show straight-up nudity, earlier studios did show pretty much about as much of Joan as they possibly could without getting their theater shut down. Often this took the form of scenes where women were changing their clothes, like Joan and Barbara changing their clothes at night nurse, or in this film I was watching the other day where I swear to God, Joan got dressed and undressed about 15 times in one shot for no particular reason. Well, I guess that was a reason. The filmmakers needed an excuse to show Joan in her slip, but it wasn't exactly rocket science to guess why that plot point was introduced. Of course, Joan was hardly the only actress to be subjected to such tasks, and Hollywood, then and now, has always been filled with incredibly beautiful women who photograph well on screen. So why was Joan Blondell so special? Perhaps that's because her physical appearance wasn't the main selling point. In fact, even in that time, even though the standards have changed, even in that time, she wasn't exactly built the same way as all the other ingenues. Perhaps that's even why, as her career progressed, Joan slowly migrated from being like a leading lady to like the wisecracking best friend. Mid-career, she was that type of supporting actor who would only come on for like a scene or two in the movie, but still somehow end up being the best thing in the movie. But even in that later career shift to more character parts, I think we see the key to her stardom even from the beginning. In short, Joan felt real. Sure, she was always the smartest person in the room in a way that only characters conceived by a Hollywood screenwriter can be, but somehow that kind of wisecracking dame just seemed to embody who Joan actually was. There's great acting, then there's an actor who plays a certain kind of part so well that we have no choice but to wonder if they play it so well because off-screen that character is kind of close to reality. Joan's characters were relatable. She was attractive, without a doubt, but in a Hollywood filled with kind of plastic-feeling, factory-made leading ladies, Joan felt like one of us, allowed to sneak into the studio and make fun of all the other people in the circus. Even in hyper-stylized Hollywood, she felt real. She felt obtainable. She felt like the type of woman you might just as easily bump into at the grocery store as see on the big screen. Add this to a sort of preternatural sense of comedic timing, and you rooted for her instantly. To know Joan is to love her. And you wanted her as your girlfriend or your best friend or that protective aunt that's always in your corner. You know, it's funny. The other day I was rewatching The Corpse Came COD, which is kind of a mystery comedy film from 1947 with Blondell and George Brent. It's not a great movie. I mean, it's just a serviceable programmer that unfortunately really makes up so much of Joan's filmography. Anyway, there are three key blonde actresses in the film, all beautiful. And the only reason I clicked on it was because Joan's name was on the poster. But it takes like 20 minutes for Joan to even appear on screen. And I remember almost turning it off multiple times because I kept complaining, where's Joan? Literally, she was the only thing worth watching and the only reason for the price of admission. The rest of the film felt like they were just more or less stalling before giving the audience what they really came for. Unfortunately, I feel like having her great talent squandered in kind of mediocre projects is a theme that runs through her career. And it's one of the reasons why I mentioned unfortunate as one of the emotions that I have when thinking about her trajectory. She had more star power than almost any woman to ever hit the silver screen. I just think her timing was a little off. Joan's father was a vaudeville comedian, so basically she grew up backstage. I think you can actually see the kind of vaudeville influence in the way she can deliver a punchline throughout her acting career. She did the beauty pageant thing as a teen, became Miss Dallas in 1926. In the 1920s, she went to Broadway and got into the theater scene. In this instance, her timing actually was perfect. Sound came to the movies in 1926, and there began a big period of pilgrimage of actors from Broadway coming to Hollywood, since they were really the only ones with experience saying so much dialogue. She and Jimmy Cagney were actually really good friends back in New York and came out west together. Joan did a couple early shorts, but both really debuted together in the 1930s film Sinner's Holiday. Then each really had their kind of mutual breakout in 1931, with Blondell playing Mamie de Cagney's Tom Powers character in The Public Enemy. They paired again later that year with the romantic comedy Blonde Crazy in 1931. Also saw Joan's first collaboration with Barbara Stanwyck in the aforementioned Night Nurse opposite a very young Clark Gable. 1932 has another Blondell classic, Three on a Match, with Ann Dvorak and a young Betty Davis as co-stars. 1933 starts her kind of backstage musical phase with films like Footlight Parade, also opposite Cagney, then Gold Diggers in 1933, which spawned multiple sequels. She does another musical, Dames, in 1934. I can only imagine her growing up on vaudeville circuit helped to inform these performances. In just those first 4 years, Joan had packed in 35 feature film appearances just before the implementation of the production code in 1934. She was unquestionably one of the biggest stars in the world at the time, and I think her kind of blue-collar, working-class persona really was like the perfect fit for the Depression-era audience. She continued to work quite a bit through the 1930s, but this, I think, is where her status in Hollywood pantheon somewhat lets her down. Again, Joan continues to be excellent. She pretty much walks on water whenever she comes on the screen, but she's playing these down-to-earth women with a killer sense of humor in these very average films. That said, one of my personal favorite Joan Blondell films does come during that time period. The 1937 film Stand-In opposite Leslie Howard and a very young pre-Casablanca Humphrey Bogart. Again, for me, Joan Blondell was kind of the perfect romantic comedy lead. As a filmmaker, I make mostly romantic comedies and romantic dramedies. The absolute hardest part of the process is always casting. You need your leads to be at once relatable but somewhat unattainable, handsome or beautiful, enough for the audience to really, pine after, but accessible in a way that the audience feels that they can actually dream that they would actually be with one of these people one day. Joan excelled at playing what I call the best friend that a guy really should be in love with the whole time. Regardless of who else is on screen, any man would be a fool not to really give all his love and devotion to Joan. Yet Joan herself is so unpretentious that she's probably not the type to loudly state that type of thing out loud, and that just makes you really want her more. She actually in real life married freaking co-star Dick Powell in 1936. The couple remained married for about 8 years before divorcing in 1944. It's rumored that career pressures and conflict over Joan's desire to have children really became the root cause of most of their marital woes. The 1940s are an interesting period for Joan as she begins to transition from being kind of that young object of desire to more supporting roles. She kicks off the 1940s with the 1941 comedy Topper Returns. Midway through the 1940s, she's in another of my favorite movies of all time, A Tree 1943, grows in Brooklyn, playing Aunt Sissy in the debut feature of director Elia Kazan. In 1947, a 41-year-old Blondell co-stars in the noir classic Nightmare Alley, opposite Tyrone Power. Her age there is important, though. The unfortunate thing about Hollywood, of course, then and now, is that Hollywood has never really figured out what to do with women in their 40s. I think it was Meryl Streep, undoubtedly one of the greatest actresses ever to grace the screen, that mentioned that when a woman is young, she gets kind of the ingenue parts, but then there's something of like a role desert in the middle there until you reach the other side of things and you get to play roles that are like the mom or the grandmom. In the 1950s and 60s, after garnering an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress for her role as Annie Rollins in The Blue Veil, much of Joan's work kind of migrated to television. She appeared on the big screen less and less. Notable big experiences did still come, though, with films like Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter and The Descent in small supporting roles. She had another supporting role in The Cincinnati Kid with Steve McQueen. And two of her last big screen roles you might remember in the 1970s came from playing Sarah Good in Opening Night and the waitress Vi in Grease. I was actually just rewatching Opening Night last week. The film was directed by John Cassavetes. It stars his wife, Jenna Rollins. Their trademark kind of anti-acting, naturalistic style is on full display. His movies were all about performance with an emphasis on being kind of grounded with very little patience for artifice. And Joan, well, she fit right in. And I think right there, that tells you all you need to know about Joan's ability as an actress. She came through vaudeville, became a major star with an unmatched comedic wit in early Hollywood studio films. She seamlessly made the transition from lead to supporting actress and continued to appear in some of the greatest films of all time. And she finished her career giving a naturalistic performance in a John Cassavetes film that would have been 180 degrees removed from the earlier, more stylized Hollywood fare that made her famous. In short, the woman could do anything. I mentioned earlier that Joan Blondell felt blue collar, working class. She felt like one of us. And in many ways, this is true. Many people come to Hollywood in search of stardom and riches, but from all I've learned about Joan through various biographies, she seemed very much like acting was just a job. Coming of age during the Depression, it wasn't about chasing fame or building a cinematic legacy. She just wanted to work, and she was that blue collar woman we saw on screen. Of course, her version of blue collar just happened to be in the form of a fitting designer gown with a 1,000-watt smile that could light up a soundstage. When Joan Blondell died in 1979, she had left behind an acting legacy that most actresses could only dream of. She had appeared in nearly 100 films and hundreds of episodes of television. She may not still have the same household name as some other Hollywood notables. Her fame peaking in the pre-code era of the 1930s as opposed to really more like the 1940s, I think, has a lot to do with that. Had she been like maybe 5-10 years younger, I think she would have come of age just the right perfect time for sustained fame. Also, had the studio given her better quality films instead of just letting her be the best part of many run-of-the-mill projects, I think, quite frankly, that would have also made a huge difference. In my opinion, Joan was always way better than the projects she was being placed in, and had she been part of projects that they themselves had been around longer, I think audiences' memories of her would have lasted longer as well. But quite honestly, I don't think Joan would have even cared. She was one of us. She was just there to get the work done. And thank God she did. We're all so much better for having known her. Thanks again for watching another episode of Movable Canvas. If you like this kind of material, be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. Usually I focus on deep dives into like a particular film, the best Hollywood and the rest of the world have to offer. These special essays are really reserved for those individuals that have truly meant something to me personally as a film lover throughout the years. So Joan, this one's for you. And for viewers, please do leave me a comment. Have you seen a lot of Joan Blondell films? Which one is your favorite? And where do you rank her among the great screen performers of the 20th century? I'd love to hear your comments in the comments section there below. But until next time, thanks for watching and have a great day.